The humid air of the Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia, clung thick and heavy on July 18, 2023, a stifling blanket over the ancient, unbroken canopy. High above the verdant expanse, a drone, model DJI Matrice 300 RTK, sliced through the quiet, its rotors a persistent, metallic hum against the natural symphony of cicadas and unseen wildlife. It wasn't charting trails for pleasure. This was a grid search, part of a desperate, multi-agency operation spearheaded by the West Virginia State Police, seeking Dr. Elias Vance, a cultural anthropologist reported missing 3 days prior. The drone's high-resolution camera, operated by a seasoned technician miles away in a mobile command unit, swept over the relentless tapestry of oak, maple, and hemlock. Each pass a slow, methodical probe into the green abyss. The technician, ex-military, focused, his comms buzzing with the low murmur of search teams on the ground. Then, a flicker. A faint, almost imperceptible plume of smoke, a whisper against the dense green, caught the drone's optical zoom. It was deep, nestled within a hollow so choked with foliage it was utterly invisible from any terrestrial vantage point, a geographical anomaly that had eluded mapping for generations. The technician, a man named Jake Miller, stiffened, his hand instinctively tightening on the controls. This wasn't a standard campfire. He nudged the drone lower, the whirring intensifying, pushing through layers of canopy. Below, a small makeshift camp materialized, rudimentary lean-tos, a crude fire pit, structures that looked less like a temporary shelter and more like something carved out of the very earth. Just as he was about to report the visual, a sound ripped through the drone's audio feed, raw, guttural, a primal lament that momentarily drowned out the rotor's hum, sending a shiver down Jake's spine. It was human, yet utterly alien. As the drone dipped lower still, its camera zooming in with eerie precision, a figure emerged from the deep shadows of the camp. It was a woman, her frame slight but her presence commanding, her face partially obscured by matted dark hair. Even through the pixelation and the distance, her features were unmistakably next different. A striking angularity, eyes set wide apart, an almost archaic quality that defied easy categorization in Jake's experience. Her gaze, unnervingly, was not on the crude camp, nor the surrounding wilderness. It was fixed directly on the sky, a piercing, ancient stare that seemed to lock onto the drone itself, as if she sensed its mechanical eye hovering above. Miles away, Jake Miller felt a cold jolt of primal fear shoot through him, his breath catching. This wasn't a lost hiker, disoriented and desperate. This was something else entirely, something profoundly, unsettlingly unknown. The relief among the West Virginia State Police ground teams was palpable when Dr. Elias Vance was finally located, disoriented and dehydrated, but alive. He was found a grueling 5 miles from the drone's initial sighting, stumbling out of a dense thicket, his clothes torn, eyes wide with a terror that transcended mere exhaustion. His first coherent words, whispered to the paramedics, weren't about his ordeal in the wilderness, but of them, a hidden community, deep within the ancient hollows, who had taken him in, observed him, and then, with chilling finality, released him with a stark warning. Leave, and tell no one of what you saw. The seasoned officers, accustomed to the raw realities of the Appalachian backcountry, exchanged uneasy glances. Vance wasn't just a survivor, he was a witness to an impossible secret, a secret they were now obligated to uncover. Sheriff Beaumont, a man whose face was etched with the hard lines of decades enforcing law in Braxton County, arrived at the mobile command unit with a skepticism born of long experience. He'd seen every kind of wild story emerge from these mountains, but Vance's account of a hidden, archaic civilization stretched credulity. Still, the drone footage was undeniable. Working in uneasy concert with the State Police Incident Commander, Captain Eva Rodriguez, Beaumont began establishing a tightly controlled perimeter around the suspected hollow. This wasn't just a search and rescue operation anymore. It was a potential standoff. Jurisdiction was already a thorny issue. Federal forest land, state police, and the county sheriff's office all had a claim, each step complicated by the sheer, unsettling anomaly of the situation. Dr. Vance, despite his ordeal, quickly became an indispensable, if reluctant, asset. His anthropological expertise offered the only lens through which to comprehend the hollow folk, as he'd cautiously begun to refer to them. He urged extreme caution, emphasizing the potential for cultural shock and the fragility of their isolation. But law enforcement's primary directive was safety and assessment. Initial attempts at communication, broadcast through loudspeakers from a safe distance, were met with an unnerving silence, occasionally punctuated by the distinct, guttural lament Jake Miller had heard, echoing from the dense foliage. These were not simply uncooperative individuals. They were a community cloaked in an almost preternatural defiance, their presence a stark, unsettling challenge to modern authority. The situation rapidly escalated into an unprecedented legal and ethical quagmire. Captain Rodriguez convened an emergency briefing, bringing in representatives from the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, and even a legal advisor from the State Attorney General's office. The core question became, how do you apply modern American law to a community that, by all appearances, had existed outside of it for centuries? Were they citizens? Did child welfare laws apply? What about their right to self-determination, akin to indigenous tribes? The answers were murky, obscured by a dense fog of legal precedents that simply didn't exist for a scenario this profoundly unique. Every decision felt like stepping onto thin ice, with the eyes of an increasingly curious world and an ancient, hidden people watching. Captain Rodriguez, grim-faced, grasped the unprecedented nature of their discovery. Maintaining an ironclad information blackout, she quietly expanded the investigation beyond local county lines. Discreet queries went to the West Virginia State Police's Criminal Intelligence Unit, cross-referencing decades of missing persons reports for any anomaly. Any group vanished into the vast wilderness. A carefully worded inquiry also reached the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, seeking patterns in extreme isolation or cult-like communities. The results, or lack thereof, proved profoundly unsettling. No existing records, no aligned historical disappearances, no precedent for an entire ancient community. The silence from national databases echoed the unnerving silence from the hollow, confirming an enigma unlike anything modern law enforcement had faced, pushing established protocols to their absolute limits. Dr. Vance, an indispensable unofficial consultant, spearheaded a deep dive into historical archives. Working remotely with a small University of Virginia team, he scoured property lines and tax records for Braxton County, seeking unmapped parcels or unexplained gaps in census data dating to the 18th and 19th centuries. Old county histories, forgotten local legends, and obscure folkloric accounts were unearthed. Some vaguely hinted at peculiar folk or hollow dwellers in the Monongahela's deepest parts, often dismissed as fanciful tales or isolated hermit families. These anecdotal whispers, once local mythology, now took on chilling new weight, suggesting a long, intentional withdrawal from the modern world, a deliberate erasure from official records. The centuries-long effort to remain hidden was staggering. Jake Miller's high-resolution drone footage became the primary forensic exhibit, intensely scrutinized. Experts from the West Virginia State Police Crime Lab meticulously analyzed every frame, zooming in on the crude lean-tos, the makeshift fire pit, and the fleeting glimpse of the woman. They identified basic tools, likely crafted from local materials, and rudimentary agricultural patterns suggesting subsistence farming. The guttural lament from the drone's audio was sent for specialized linguistic analysis. Initial reports were inconclusive, but hinted at a highly divergent, archaic English, perhaps influenced by centuries-old regional dialects, isolated from modern linguistic evolution. The complete absence of any modern materials, plastic to metal, within the visible camp structures was particularly striking, reinforcing the theory of profound, enduring isolation. Dr. Vance underwent extensive, multi-agency interviews, first with state police, then a carefully selected psychologist, recounting his harrowing experience. He detailed his accidental stumble into the hollow, the initial apprehension by watchful individuals, and his subsequent captivity, more intense observation than imprisonment. He described their simple homespun clothing, unique physical characteristics like subtle facial angularity and wide-set eyes, and a quiet, reserved demeanor. He noted their archaic English dialect, interspersed with unfamiliar words and inflections, and their deep, almost spiritual reverence for the ancient forest. His testimony, delivered with academic precision yet tinged with lingering awe and fear, painted a vivid picture of a people living by ancient rhythms, fiercely guarding their ancestral lands from the encroaching, bewildering outside world. The observations from Vance and drone footage immediately raised red flags for public health officials. The West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, DHHR, began quietly drafting preliminary reports citing severe concerns, potential malnutrition, lack of modern vaccinations, and high probability of genetic isolation. Dr. Vance, recalling certain physical traits, cautiously introduced consanguinity to the task force, highlighting subtle yet consistent markers. Geneticists from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, were discreetly consulted. Their initial hypotheses, based on limited data, pointed towards generations of endogamous marriage, a population bottleneck consistent with centuries of inbreeding. This assessment underscored the urgency and complexity, shifting focus from lost people to a highly vulnerable, at-risk population whose existence profoundly challenged modern medical and ethical paradigms. The initial legal push for intervention slammed into a formidable barrier, proving as impenetrable as the ancient forest surrounding the hollow. Captain Rodriguez, keenly aware of the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources' urgent concerns about public health and child welfare, had immediately sought a court order. Her aim was a comprehensive health assessment and a welfare check on the children vaguely glimpsed in the drone footage. Yet, the legal advisor from the State Attorney General's office delivered a stark reality. There was no direct legal precedent for such a situation. The very notion of an apparently sovereign, uncontacted community existing within state lines, exhibiting no overt signs of criminal activity beyond their hidden presence, presented an unprecedented jurisdictional nightmare. This profound legal quagmire effectively stalled any immediate, forceful action, much to the growing frustration of Sheriff Beaumont, who demanded a clear, decisive path forward. The circuit court judge, after an emergency session that stretched late into the night, issued a definitive denial. His ruling cited a complex web of constitutional protections, the inherent privacy rights of individuals, the fundamental freedom of association, and crucially, the profound lack of any demonstrable threat to public safety from the hollow folk. He emphasized that without clear, compelling evidence of abuse or imminent danger, the state could not forcibly invade a community, regardless of its isolation or unconventional nature. Dr. Vance, though ethically conflicted about the prospect of forced intervention, watched the legal team's faces fall. The judge's decision solidified the hollow folk's de facto sovereignty, transforming the tactical challenge into a bureaucratic and diplomatic impasse. This denial sent ripples of frustration and disbelief through the command unit. Captain Rodriguez, a woman accustomed to decisive action and clear directives, found herself tethered by legal red tape and an enigma that defied every established protocol. Meanwhile, the media, though still largely unaware of the full scope of their discovery, was starting to buzz with whispers of a lost tribe in the Monongahela, fueled by anonymous leaks and the lingering mysteries surrounding Dr. Vance's disappearance and reappearance. This external pressure only exacerbated the internal stalemate. Dr. Vance, now firmly advocating for extreme caution and respect for the hollow folks' autonomy, found himself increasingly at odds with the more aggressive elements within law enforcement who saw the legal setback as a temporary hurdle to be overcome, not a moral boundary to respect. The clock was ticking, and the fragile peace around the hollow felt increasingly precarious. Geospatial analysts from the West Virginia State Police's Technical Services Unit, working round the clock, began an unprecedented deep dive into Jake Miller's drone footage. Using advanced photogrammetry and 3D modeling, they meticulously mapped the hollow, revealing subtle, ancient terracing on the slopes that indicated long-term, organized cultivation, not simply temporary foraging. The rudimentary lean-tos, initially dismissed as crude shelters, showed construction methods mirroring those of early colonial Appalachian settlers, utilizing specific timber joinery techniques and natural binding materials long forgotten in mainstream construction. This wasn't a temporary encampment. It was a deeply ingrained ancestral settlement, camouflaged by centuries of deliberate environmental integration. Dr. Vance, collaborating intensely with a historical linguist from the University of West Virginia, made a critical breakthrough regarding the guttural lament captured by the drone's audio feed. After extensive digital cleaning and cross-referencing with obscure linguistic archives, the fragmented sounds revealed a dialect astonishingly similar to 18th-century Scotch-Irish settlers in the region, rather than a generic archaic English. This wasn't merely an old way of speaking, it was a specific, preserved linguistic fossil, suggesting their ancestors had diverged from the mainstream before the American Revolution, maintaining an unbroken oral tradition for over 2 centuries, a living bridge to a bygone era. This linguistic revelation provided Dr. Vance's University of Virginia team with a crucial, if unsettling, timestamp. Armed with the new data, they delved back into colonial land grants, militia muster rolls, and obscure church records from the mid-1700s, focusing on the Monongahela region. While no direct mention of hollow folk appeared, a distinct pattern of small, isolated family groups purchasing or claiming land deep in the forest's most inaccessible pockets, only to vanish from subsequent census or tax records within a generation, began to emerge. These lost families were often dismissed as having moved further west or simply died out, but Vance now theorized they had simply retreated further into the forest's impenetrable embrace, their disappearance a deliberate act of profound isolation. Simultaneously, forensic botanists, working from the drone's high-resolution imagery and meticulously collected pollen samples from its landing struts after a controlled, brief descent near the perimeter, confirmed a unique micro-ecosystem within the hollow. They identified endemic plant species cultivated for food and medicine, some not seen in the region for over a century in conventional farming or even wild growth. Soil analysis from the same samples indicated generations of organic enrichment, suggesting continuous human habitation and sustainable agricultural practices that had maintained ecological balance. This reinforced the image of a self-sufficient, closed-loop community entirely independent of modern supply chains. The convergence of these diverse investigative threads painted an increasingly coherent yet profoundly unsettling portrait of the hollow folk. The archaic language, the colonial-era construction methods, the self-sustaining agriculture, and the complete absence of any modern materials weren't merely coincidences or the result of simple hardship. They were the meticulously preserved remnants of a community that had consciously, perhaps even fiercely, chosen to remain outside the relentless march of time. Every new piece of data solidified the understanding. This wasn't a group that had simply been forgotten. They were a people who had gone to extraordinary, generations-long lengths to remain hidden, their existence a testament to an almost unimaginable resilience and a chilling, deliberate defiance of the modern world. Dr. Elias Vance, hunched over a microfilm reader in the dimly lit West Virginia State Archives, felt the familiar ache in his neck, yet a nascent excitement buzzed within him. He was sifting through microfilmed Braxton County court ledgers from the late 1700s, an era when the Monongahela frontier was a chaotic mix of land grabs and tenuous settlements. Suddenly, an entry flickered into focus, detailing a series of aggressive land disputes, not just typical boundary squabbles among individual settlers, but systematic, legally dubious acquisitions by burgeoning timber interests. One particular record, almost illegible, referenced a small, non-English-speaking peculiar settlement whose traditional land claims were summarily dismissed. This document, a forgotten fragment amidst countless deeds, suggested an early, coercive push, challenging the prevailing theory of purely voluntary, gradual retreat. This faded ink blot on an ancient parchment, barely a footnote in regional history, shifted the entire narrative for Vance. It wasn't merely about a people choosing to withdraw into the wilderness. It implied they were actively forced to retreat deeper, driven from ancestral lands by the relentless, often brutal expansion of industrial America. The peculiar settlement described in the ledger, likely unable to navigate a foreign legal system or communicate effectively with the encroaching authorities, had seemingly vanished into the very hollow now occupied by the Hollow folk. Their subsequent, deliberate erasure from official records, once interpreted as a strategic choice for isolation, now appeared as a desperate act of survival, a flight from exploitation and cultural annihilation. Vance immediately presented his findings, a scanned copy of the ledger entry and his detailed analysis, to a somber Captain Rodriguez and a visibly shaken Sheriff Beaumont. The sheriff, whose initial perspective had been rooted in local law enforcement and public safety, now saw the Hollow folk not just as an enigma, but as potential victims. Rodriguez, ever the pragmatist, recognized the profound, game-changing implications. This wasn't just a fascinating cultural discovery, it was a potential historical injustice, one that could dramatically alter public perception and reshape their entire legal and diplomatic strategy. The Hollow folk's deep-seated distrust of outsiders, once interpreted as inherent xenophobia, now resonated with the echoes of a forgotten, systemic betrayal. The moral compass of the investigation had profoundly shifted. The whispers that had once been confined to online forums and local gossip columns exploded into a national media firestorm. A leaked drone photo, grainy but unmistakable, showing the angular features of one of the Hollow folk women, went viral, accompanied by a sensationalist headline: "Lost Tribe of Appalachia, Centuries-Old Secret Unearthed." Cable news channels ran breathless segments, speculating wildly about their origins, health, and potential integration into modern society. Overnight, the Monongahela National Forest became the epicenter of an unprecedented cultural phenomenon. Captain Rodriguez's command unit was inundated with calls from Washington, D.C., state senators, and a barrage of aggressive reporters demanding access and answers. This sudden, intense spotlight ratcheted up the pressure, transforming a contained investigation into a public spectacle. The digital frenzy soon spilled into the physical world, transforming the perimeter of the Hollow into a bizarre carnival of curiosity and confrontation. Self-proclaimed wilderness survivalists, conspiracy theorists, and New Age spiritual seekers converged on remote forest roads, setting up makeshift camps, vying for a glimpse of the Hollow folk. Local residents, some fascinated, others deeply suspicious, swelled the burgeoning crowds. Advocacy groups, from indigenous rights organizations to those championing rescue, arrived with banners and bullhorns, their conflicting demands echoing through ancient trees. News vans lined dirt roads, satellite dishes pointing skyward like metallic sunflowers, transmitting live reports that further fueled global fascination. Sheriff Beaumont's deputies, already stretched thin, struggled to manage this human tide, maintaining fragile peace against mounting social unrest and ideological divides. Within the mobile command unit, the external chaos amplified simmering internal divisions. Sheriff Beaumont, his face a mask of weary frustration, now openly questioned the efficacy of their non-interventionist stance, arguing that the escalating public presence posed a greater threat to the Hollow folk than any carefully managed outreach. "We're losing control out here, Captain," he'd growl, gesturing towards the distant clamor. Dr. Vance, however, countered with renewed urgency, reminding them of the historical injustices he'd uncovered, fearing that a forced entry, even under the guise of protection, would be a repeat of the past. More concerning were intelligence reports. Several organized, heavily armed groups, motivated by sensationalism and a twisted sense of liberation, were rumored to be converging, their intentions disturbingly unclear. The line between observation and invasion was blurring, threatening to erupt into violent confrontation. The rumors solidified into chilling reality under the cloak of a moonless night. A comms officer's voice, tight with alarm, shattered the pre-dawn quiet. "Breach! Sector Gamma!" Multiple individuals, armed, moving fast. On the ground, a small, highly organized militia group, cloaked in tactical gear and wielding hunting rifles, systematically disabled a section of the perimeter fence, moving with practiced stealth towards the Hollow. Their objective was unclear: to liberate the Hollow folk, to prove their existence, or something far more sinister. Sheriff Beaumont immediately deployed a rapid response team, but the forest's dense canopy and treacherous terrain became an ally to the intruders. The immediate danger wasn't just to the Hollow folks' isolation, but to the lives of those attempting to prevent a catastrophe. The standoff had arrived, not as a negotiation, but as a violent intrusion, threatening to tear apart their fragile secret existence. The chilling diagnosis arrived through a carefully negotiated, yet still remote, medical assessment. Young Cale, barely 5 years old, was gravely ill with a treatable bacterial infection, his small body ravaged by a fever that threatened to claim him within hours. Dr. Vance, relaying the grim news from the perimeter's makeshift medical tent, saw Alara's face, usually a mask of stoic resolve, contort with a raw, guttural grief that echoed the lament Jake Miller had first heard. Despite the desperate pleas from Captain Rodriguez and Sheriff Beaumont, who offered a sterile, isolated medical evacuation, Alara remained unyielding. Her ancient eyes, filled with centuries of inherited distrust, saw not salvation, but contamination. To allow Cale to be taken was to sever the last, sacred thread of their people's purity, a betrayal of their ancestors, sacrificed to remain hidden. Her refusal, absolute and final, condemned the child in the name of an unbroken tradition, leaving the command unit grappling with an impossible, agonizing choice. But within the Hollow, a different kind of anguish was brewing. Lyra, Cale's elder cousin and apprentice healer, watched his labored breathing, his small frame convulsing, and felt a profound, rebellious despair. She had heard Dr. Vance's hushed explanations of modern medicine's capabilities, glimpsed the sterile supplies, and understood, with a clarity that transcended Ilara's ancient fears, that Cale's life was slipping away needlessly. As Ilara retreated into a trance of desperate, traditional healing chants, Lyra made a choice that would shatter generations of isolation. Under the cover of a dense, moonless night, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and fierce determination, she cradled the unconscious child and, with a silent prayer for forgiveness, began the perilous trek towards the flickering lights of the outside world, towards the perimeter, towards an uncertain future for them all. The pre-dawn quiet at Sector Delta of the perimeter was shattered by a frantic, whispered cry. Lyra, disheveled and gasping for breath, emerged from the dense foliage, Cale clutched tight to her chest, his skin burning. Her sudden appearance electrified the scene, instantly halting the encroaching militia group who, having breached another section, were now frozen in stunned silence. Sheriff Beaumont's deputies, already on high alert, converged, their weapons raised but their faces etched with shock. The flash of a hidden camera, an audible click, captured the raw, visceral image. A young woman, ancient in her appearance yet defiant in her desperation, offering her dying kin to the bewildering embrace of modernity. The standoff was immediate, intense, and profoundly personal, with Cale's fragile life now the undeniable focal point, sealing the Hollow folks' fate with a single, desperate act. Lyra's desperate act saved Cale. Rushed to the perimeter's field hospital, the child received immediate medical attention, his fever slowly receding under the care of state police paramedics and DHHR medical staff. The militia, momentarily stunned by Lyra's sudden appearance, was swiftly disarmed and apprehended by Sheriff Beaumont's deputies, averting a violent clash but not the public spectacle. Lyra, initially overwhelmed, remained steadfast by Cale's side, observing the bewildering technology and gentle hands that brought her cousin back from the brink. Her courage, born of a fierce love and a nascent understanding of the outside world, had irrevocably shattered centuries of carefully guarded isolation. The raw, visceral image of her emerging from the ancient forest, a dying child in her arms, had already gone viral, a poignant symbol of a clash between two worlds, sealing the Hollow Folks' fate with an undeniable, human plea. The legal and social fallout was immediate and immense. A unique cultural preservation zone was swiftly established by federal and state governments around the Hollow, a complex legal framework designed to protect the Hollow Folks' remaining lands while allowing cautious, monitored outreach. Dr. Vance, now a crucial intermediary, began the painstaking work of documenting their language and customs. His initial research mandate transformed into a mission of cultural stewardship. Medical teams, working under strict protocols, initiated a slow, trust-building campaign, addressing the severe public health concerns with respect for their traditions. The national debate raged, cultural sovereignty versus humanitarian intervention, echoing historical struggles faced by Native American tribes. Politicians and activists weighed in, their arguments highlighting the profound challenges of integrating a people who had existed outside of modern American society for generations, their very existence a living, breathing anachronism. The Hollow Folks' centuries of hidden existence were undeniably over. Their worldview, once insular and self-contained, was now irrevocably shattered by the relentless glare of modernity. While Cale recovered, and Lyra, now a bridge between worlds, navigated their uncertain future, the community grappled with the loss of their profound secrecy, their ancient traditions under unprecedented threat. This extraordinary story, playing out in the quiet hollows of West Virginia, serves as a powerful reminder of America's vanishing frontiers, the enduring mysteries that still lie hidden, and the profound resilience of the human spirit. If this journey into the unknown, this clash of cultures, and the fight for survival resonated with you, like this video, subscribe for more untold stories, and tell us in the comments, what other secrets do you think America's vast landscapes still hold?